He thought I was taking him on the most romantic birthday surprise of his life. Instead, I left him waiting alone for hours, just to ask him one brutal question. So, how does it feel to have someone play with your feelings? Because after what he'd done to an innocent boy named Arthur, he deserved nothing less. If you've ever watched someone get exactly what they deserve after years of cruelty, hit that like button. Subscribe if you believe karma doesn't forget. And drop a comment, what's the most satisfying revenge you've ever seen? Now, let's dive into this story. I was 26 when I met Thomas. Tall, charming, well-read, with a calm confidence that made him seem grounded. He wasn't loud or flashy, but there was something magnetic about his energy. It wasn't long before I found myself falling for him. He introduced me to obscure novels I hadn't read, cooked for me with surprising skill, and he made an effort to genuinely listen. We had the kind of chemistry that makes you imagine futures, quiet evenings, travel, maybe even a life together. After just under 2 months of dating, Thomas invited me to celebrate his 29th birthday at his father's country house in rural France. It wasn't just me, he'd also invited 2 of his childhood best friends, Alex and Bart, and said it would be a long weekend filled with food, wine, and nostalgia. I was excited. Meeting someone's family and oldest friends is a big step, and I was honored. His father, I'd heard, was a well-respected intellectual and semi-retired architect. It felt like I was getting a glimpse into Thomas's roots, into the man he truly was. We arrived Friday afternoon. The house was nestled on a gentle slope, surrounded by sun-dappled vineyards and lined with rows of lavender. A postcard version of the French countryside. Thomas's father greeted me warmly. He was the kind of older gentleman who makes you feel instantly at ease, gracious, sharp, and perceptive. We connected almost immediately, chatting about travel, art, and politics over dinner. I could see where Thomas had gotten his intellect. The evening was light-hearted, filled with wine, cheese, laughter, and playful teasing among old friends. I went to bed thinking this might be the beginning of something truly meaningful. Saturday was perfect, until it wasn't. We spent the morning hiking nearby trails, picking up local pastries for breakfast, and preparing for a garden party with some neighbors and old friends of Thomas's. There were at least 20 people that evening, drinking rosé under strings of fairy lights as the sun set. Music played softly, and I found myself genuinely happy. Later that night, a group of us, maybe 8 or 9, gathered around a campfire. Someone suggested sharing childhood stories. You know, the usual innocent game of who was the most mischievous. At first, it was harmless. Silly stories about sneaking into movie theaters, setting off fireworks, awkward first kisses. I laughed along, enjoying the camaraderie. Then the tone changed. Thomas and his friends began to tell a story about a boy from their teenage years, a boy named Arthur. And what I heard next turned my stomach. They were 14, maybe 15, when it happened. Arthur was a shy, quiet kid at school. Socially awkward. Didn't have many friends. An easy target. Thomas, Bart, and Alex decided to have some fun with him. They created a fake girl profile on MSN Messenger. If you're from that era, you know it was the teenage hangout spot online. Using photos of Bart's real-life cousin, they started talking to Arthur. Flirting. Complimenting him. Playing into every lonely teenage fantasy he probably had. And they didn't just do it for a day or a week. They carried on this deception for months. They encouraged Arthur to open up. To send heartfelt messages. They played with his emotions, made him believe he had someone who cared. It was already horrifying. But then they took it a step further. They planned a fake meetup. Told him his girlfriend wanted to see him in person. They asked him to take a 2 to 3 hour bus ride to another town, and as a private joke, told him to wear a t-shirt with Elmer the elephant on it, something they had made up to humiliate him further. And Arthur. He believed them. He showed up. Alone. Wearing the shirt. Waiting. But, of course, no one was there. And the next day, they shared the story at school. Laughed about how gullible he was. Shared his love notes. Made sure the entire student body knew he'd fallen for a lie. Arthur stopped coming to school. Rumors were that he changed schools. Maybe even moved away. I sat there frozen. My face flushed with horror and disbelief. And what shocked me the most wasn't just the cruelty of what they had done, it was that they were laughing about it. Still. Years later. As grown men. I waited. Waited for some kind of remorse. A looking back, we were awful. A hint of regret. There was none. In fact, Thomas joked they weren't evil enough to get Arthur to send nudes, which they had tried. He said it with a laugh. A twisted smile. Like it was all just a stupid prank they never quite finished. Even Bart chimed in with something like, "Damn, we could have gone viral if we recorded that." I glanced at Thomas's father. He had joined the campfire midway and was sitting silently at the edge of the group. I'll never forget the look in his eyes, deep disappointment. A kind of heartbreak only a parent could have. But Thomas didn't even notice. The fire crackled. The laughter continued. I stood up and left. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling. I couldn't stop picturing Arthur. A lonely boy. Vulnerable. Trusting. The courage it must have taken to open his heart to someone. The crushing realization that it was all a joke. The humiliation. The emotional damage. And Thomas, the man I had started imagining a future with, had orchestrated that pain. And still found it funny. At around 4 a.m., I heard him stumble into bed, drunk. I pretended to be asleep. I knew then that I couldn't stay. Not just in this house. But with him. The man I thought I knew was just a mask, and I had seen what was underneath. Sunday was his birthday. The plan was that I'd take him to a fancy restaurant nearby for a surprise date, just the two of us, before we joined the others again later. But I had a different plan. I quietly packed my things early that morning. I left the house without a word and took the train back to Paris. But not before I set the scene. I sent Thomas a text. "Happy birthday. I've arranged a surprise. Meet me at random scenic location at 12:30. I'm heading out now to set everything up. I want this to be special for you." I picked a place I found on Google Maps, one that was far from anything familiar, just to make sure he committed to it. Then I sent follow-up messages instructing him to wait, that I was finalizing the details, that he'd understand once he saw me. At 1:15 p.m., I gave him the next instruction: meet me at a nearby restaurant and order whatever he wanted. I told him to get the most expensive bottle of wine. That I'd be there soon. At 1:30 p.m., the calls started. I let them ring. At 2 p.m., he texted, "What's going on? Are you okay?" At 2:30, the tone shifted: confusion, concern, panic. That's when I texted, "Alice, ca fait quoi d'avoir des gens qui jouent avec tes sentiments." Translation: So, how does it feel to have people play with your feelings? And then I stopped replying. The next few hours were a blur of notifications. Missed calls. Messages. Apologies. Explanations. None of them mattered. Then an unknown number rang. I answered. It was Alex, one of the childhood friends. "What the hell is going on?" he asked. "Thomas is crushed. You ruined his birthday." I took a breath. "Tell Thomas," I said slowly, "that this is a very small payback for what you did to Arthur. And tell him to stop calling me." Then I hung up. And blocked the number. I spent the rest of that Sunday in Paris, walking aimlessly. My phone was silent, intentionally so. The calls and texts from Thomas and his friends were blocked, but the thoughts, they kept rushing in. Even though I had seen the truth about him, even though I had delivered my poetic justice in a way I felt was proportional, I still felt gutted. I had cared for Thomas. I had wanted to believe he was the man I thought he was. That the wine, the long walks, the way he spoke softly about books and philosophy wasn't just a veneer. But in just one night, that illusion had shattered. Here's what people often underestimate: it's not always the act of betrayal that breaks you, it's the reveal of someone's true self. It's standing across from a person you thought you knew, someone you trusted with pieces of your future, and realizing that behind that gentle smile was someone who once delighted in cruelty. Cruelty that wasn't random. It was methodical. Targeted. Sustained. And worst of all, unrepented. I think that's what shook me the most. Had Thomas expressed remorse, had he looked pained when telling the story, maybe even said, We were monsters and I hate who I was. I could have seen a man who grew. A man who evolved. But no. He had laughed. He had doubled down. He had joked about nudes. There's no forgiveness for that. Over the next few days, the word got around. A few mutual friends called, some to comfort me, others, not so much. One conversation still echoes in my mind. A friend we both knew, let's call her Claire, called me with an edge in her voice. Look, she said, I heard what you did. And honestly, it was cruel. You led him on and humiliated him on his birthday. That's not how adults handle things. I listened, letting her words hang. When she was done, I asked quietly, did you hear the full story? About Arthur? She hesitated. Yeah, I heard something about that, but come on, it was years ago. They were kids. I exhaled. They tormented a vulnerable boy. They manipulated his emotions. They humiliated him publicly. They could have destroyed him. And they still laugh about it. Claire didn't reply for a while. Then she said, still, that wasn't your role to punish him. And maybe that's true. Maybe I wasn't the appointed judge of anyone. But sometimes life doesn't hand out balanced court dates and tidy resolutions. Sometimes, you are the moment of reckoning. Sometimes, you are karma. But not everyone thought I was wrong. A few days after the incident, I received a phone call I didn't expect, Thomas's father. He didn't scold me. Didn't raise his voice. In fact, the moment I heard his tone, I felt my shoulders drop. I just wanted to say thank you, he said. I was stunned. Not for what happened, he added quickly. I'm not thanking you for hurting my son. But for showing me who he really is. Because I didn't recognize that boy at the campfire. And I needed to. He paused, then said, I didn't sleep that night. I kept thinking about that poor boy they talked about. Arthur. My son used to be so gentle when he was little. I don't know when that changed. But I'm glad you saw it. And I understand why you left. He didn't ask me to come back. Didn't try to explain away his son's actions. He just thanked me for revealing the truth. That call meant more to me than I expected. I never responded to any of Thomas's texts after that weekend. Not a single one. But friends told me he spiraled a little. Not dramatically, he didn't lose his job or move away, but something in him seemed dimmed. They said he stopped being as sociable. That he drank more. That birthdays became something he dreaded. I didn't relish that. This wasn't about ruining his life. It was about giving him a sliver of what he gave to someone else. About planting a seed of consequence in a man who had never once faced any. Some might say it wasn't my place. But if not me, then who? I don't know what became of Arthur. I never knew his last name. I wouldn't recognize him on the street. And even if I could find him, I wouldn't reach out. Because while part of me burns with the need to apologize on behalf of monsters, I know some scars are best left undisturbed. But I do hope he's out there. Thriving. Healed. Happy. I hope he found love, real love, with someone who values his heart, not someone who weaponizes it. And I hope, in some quiet corner of his life, he felt the universe tilt back in his favor. Even just a little. People ask why I did it on his birthday. Why not wait? Break up gently. Speak my truth calmly. Because sometimes, the timing is the message. He chose to share that story while surrounded by friends, wine in hand, under the stars, on the eve of celebration. He chose to relive a young man's deepest pain and laugh about it as though it were a party trick. So I chose the one day he expected to be adored and surprised to let him feel what Arthur must have felt. Excitement, anticipation, then silence. Confusion. Abandonment. Humiliation. Not forever. Not even for a week. Just for one afternoon. It was a shadow of what he gave. And it was enough. There's a saying, your past doesn't define you unless you're still proud of it. I didn't leave Thomas because of who he was. I left him because of who he still was. And sometimes, the greatest justice isn't punishment, it's revelation. Because once someone shows you who they are, it's your job to believe them. If you felt that revenge served up ice cold, Hit that like button and subscribe for more powerful stories where karma makes a house call. Comment below, would you have done the same? Or was I too harsh? And if you've ever been Arthur, know this, you matter. You were never the joke. You were always the better person. Before all of this, before the fire pit, the story, the text messages, I had believed in Thomas. Not love yet, but hope. He was the kind of man who opened doors, who brought flowers not on special occasions, but just because he saw sunflowers and thought of you. He quoted Camus, could talk for hours about the ethics of AI, and once made me a perfect risotto while playing Miles Davis in the background. On our 5th date, he gave me a book with my name written inside the front cover in his careful script. All of this made what I saw that night so much more devastating. How could someone who presented as so thoughtful, so emotionally intelligent, have once been the architect of such a heartless campaign? And not just that, but still laugh about it. It made me question not just him, but myself. How had I missed this? If you've ever studied psychology, you might be familiar with something called the dark triad: narcissism, Machiavellianism, and psychopathy. These traits, when blended in small, socially acceptable doses, are often found in charismatic people. People who rise in corporate ladders, charm dates, dominate social groups. They learn how to mimic empathy. They learn the language of kindness, without the substance. Thomas may not have been some clinical case study, but that night revealed to me just how easy it is to be deceived by someone who wears the right mask. He didn't just tell that story for laughs. He told it to impress. He wanted us to be in awe of how clever they'd been. As if cruelty was just boyish genius. And when no one laughed, when people like me and even his father went quiet, he looked confused. That's when I knew. In the weeks after I vanished from his life, I wrote 100 messages to Thomas in my head. Some angry, some sad, some longing, some surgical in their dissection of his behavior. But I never sent any of them. Still, there's one that I sometimes revisit, the message I would have sent if I thought he'd actually listen. It went like this. You built your youth on someone else's suffering and never once looked back. I hope this moment makes you do that. Not for me. Not to win me back. But for you. Because one day, you might be a father. And if your child comes home sobbing because someone crushed their heart in a cruel joke, I hope you remember Arthur. I spent a lot of time in those weeks unpacking my decision. Friends told me I'd overreacted. That I should have just broken things off respectfully. That I humiliated him unnecessarily. But those friends didn't sit in that circle by the fire. They didn't hear the mocking tone. The gleeful cruelty. The lack of reflection. They didn't see Thomas lean back and laugh while sipping from his beer like he was recalling a scene from a teen comedy, not an act of calculated emotional abuse. And they didn't see me lie awake that night, heart pounding, thinking about a 14-year-old boy in an Elmer the Elephant t-shirt, alone at a train station, waiting for someone who never existed. Revenge is often portrayed as ugly, as vengeful, as something that consumes the avenger more than the villain. But there's another kind. There's the kind that simply holds up a mirror. That says, this is who you are. I just made you feel it. My version of revenge wasn't about retribution, it was about education. You spent an entire weekend expecting adoration, gifts, attention. Instead, you received distance, delay, confusion, longing. Exactly what Arthur felt. Not for 6 months like he did. Just for one day. And maybe, just maybe, it left a mark on you. Weeks later, an email slipped through. It was from Alex, the childhood friend who had also laughed by the fire. It was brief. Almost apologetic in tone. I didn't realize how far it had gone with Arthur back then. It was a long time ago, but your reaction made me think. I'm not saying what you did was right, but I get it now. No excuses. No groveling. But maybe a seed of understanding. And that was enough for me. Because I didn't want groveling. I wanted awareness. It's a strange thing when you realize that the person you're dating was someone you would have feared in school. Someone you might have protected others from. I thought of Arthur often in the months that followed. He became more than just the subject of a cruel story. He became a symbol of all the outsiders in our lives. The quiet kids. The ones who got teased for loving cartoons too long, or wearing the wrong shoes, or being too soft. Maybe I dated Thomas because some part of me wanted to believe the world changes. That even people who were once cruel grow kind. And maybe they can. But only when they admit what they were and regret it. I'll never again ignore that voice, the one that goes quiet when someone reveals their past with pride instead of remorse. I'll never again rationalize red flags just because they're wrapped in charm. And I'll never forget that being smart or successful doesn't equal good. It was a hard-earned lesson. One that cost me a relationship, a few friendships, and a part of my innocence. But it gave me something better, clarity. I sometimes wonder what Thomas told the others when I didn't show. Did he lie? Pretend I had a family emergency? Or did he admit what happened, how I ghosted him on his birthday, how I lured him from place to place like a breadcrumb trail of confusion? I imagine him at that restaurant, sitting at a table set for two, the fancy bottle opened, glasses sweating in the summer heat. Every minute that passed must have deepened the sting. First confusion. Then worry. Then realization. That moment, that slow, unraveling horror, was the real mirror I held up to him. He got to feel just a fraction of the pain Arthur must have endured waiting at that train station years ago. Except Thomas had warm food, money in his pocket, and people to call. Arthur had none of that. Just a t-shirt with a joke no one explained and silence that screamed betrayal. I don't take joy in imagining Thomas's heartbreak. But I do take satisfaction in knowing that, maybe for the first time, he felt the consequence of cruelty. After that day, I never spoke to Thomas again. He tried. Calls. Messages. Emails. Even handwritten letters delivered by a mutual friend. But I didn't respond. Not because I wanted to punish him further. But because I knew nothing I said would change the fact that he hadn't changed. Remorse is loud when it's real. You don't keep calling someone without first acknowledging your own sins. Instead, his first texts were all confusion and self-pity. Why would you do this? What did I do wrong? Is this about the story? It was years ago. It was never about just the story. It was about the lack of shame in the telling of it. 1 week later, I received a phone call I didn't expect, Thomas's father. I was hesitant to answer. But something in me said it would be different. And it was. He didn't beg me to come back. He didn't defend his son. He simply said, "I'm sorry for what you had to hear." I didn't sleep that night either. I raised him better, or at least I thought I did. His voice cracked. He didn't try to justify anything. He told me he respected my decision, even if it hurt to see things fall apart. That man, unlike his son, had the backbone to admit when something was wrong. And it was that call, not the story, that truly broke my heart. I don't know where Thomas is today. I stopped checking. For a while, I was tempted to look him up. Curiosity always lingers. But then I'd remind myself that some stories don't deserve sequels. Arthur. I still wonder about. I hope he healed. I hope the trauma didn't define him. That he found love that wasn't a lie. That he built confidence in places where his peers once tried to shatter it. If I ever met him, if I ever recognized him somehow, I don't even know what I'd say. Maybe I wouldn't say anything at all. Maybe I'd just buy him coffee. Ask him what he's reading. Tell him I like his shirt. Something kind. Something real. And let that be enough. It's easy to write off teenage cruelty as just being kids. But there's a difference between immaturity and malice. Between a prank and a campaign of emotional torture. Thomas's story wasn't some harmless memory. It was the excavation of a real person's pain for laughs. And my reaction wasn't about vengeance. It was about drawing a line. A line that says, if you hurt others and never feel sorry, don't expect to be loved like a good man. Not all revenge needs to be explosive. Sometimes, the most powerful thing you can do is remove yourself and leave behind a silence that echoes louder than any words. Thomas may have gotten a taste of what it feels like to be deceived, to be led on, to be alone in a place you didn't expect. And maybe, just maybe, it made him think. We all carry versions of our younger selves inside us. What matters is what we do with them. If you believe that karma sometimes needs a little push, hit that like button. Subscribe for more stories where justice comes in unexpected forms. And tell me in the comments, what's the most satisfying revenge you've ever seen? Or the moment you realized someone you loved wasn't who they claimed to be. Thanks for watching, and until next time, stay sharp, stay kind, and always trust your gut.